We real cool, the pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sen, we then gin, we jazz June, we die soon. Hello, I'm Ciona Rouse, and that poem was We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks, a poet whom we're going to spend some good time with today. One of my favorites. I am coming to you in partnership with Nashville Public Library through the Porch Writers Collective. February, of course, is a great month to discover voices that you may not hear often or that are underrepresented and may just be new to you. Of course, paying attention to Black voices year-round is important. Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, all of these voices will elevate you all year long. But what a gift it is that we get a month to focus in and learn some new voices that may be previously ignored in history. So there are so many incredible contemporary Black voices, and I do want to mention a few before diving into Gwendolyn Brooks. They are the godchildren of our godmother poet. A couple that I would love for you to check out if you aren't already reading. Claudia Rankine is one that I love. Ross Gay is a contemporary Black poet who's doing incredible work. The way that Yona Harvey uses language really sings. Terrence Hayes is another poet that I love, and I'm going to speak about him a little bit later and how he contributes to Gwendolyn's continuing legacy. I grew up in South Carolina knowing Nikki Finney, and if you haven't checked out her work, I hope that you're reading a little bit of Nikki Finney soon. And of course, Nashville's very own. We have so many incredible poets here in Nashville. One of my favorites is my dear friend Tiana Clark. So I hope you check out some of those contemporary voices. Today, though, we are going to focus on Gwendolyn Brooks, godmother of poetry, the first Black woman to be poet laureate in our country. And she also has a brief but significant Nashville connection that we'll dive into later. She is very dear to me as she's one of the first poets my mom introduced me to when I was younger and made sure that I spent some time with. And so in college, I actually spent a lot of time with her work with my senior thesis, and it was actually the year that she died in 2000 that I was steeped in her work. And so she's always been very important to me and my work as a poet. In 1950, Brooks became the first African American to be awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for her book, Annie Allen. Now, it's important that we name that there were many Black people contributing to the literary canon before this recognition, but the literary canon at the time was so tightly shut. I mean, even between 1922 and 1944, 3 men won the Pulitzer Prize 9 different times. So in this short amount of time, there were so few people that they were celebrating and applauding that they gave it to the same 3 men repeatedly. Robert Frost, Stephen Vincent Benet, and Edwin Arlington Robinson. Of course, we know there were more poets than that were writing great work. And of course, we know that African American poets were writing great work. So this is just simply a moment that the literary canon decided to open up a bit and celebrate a woman whose accomplishments were obvious and wonderful. And Brooks was more than worthy. She was born in Kansas in 1917 and relocated to Chicago as her family participated in what we now call the Great Migration, where a lot of Black people left the South so that they could survive and thrive in other cities. She lived in one of the largest Black neighborhoods in the country called Bronzeville, and she wrote intimately about the everyday lives of people in her community. Now, Brooks began writing a poem a day when she was 11 years old, at least one poem a day, which I think is maybe why my mom introduced her to me when I was younger, so that I could have that same ferociousness and tenacity with my writing. She kept notebooks, which she named after each year of her life. But then sometimes she'd have extra notebooks, sometimes called like my fancy notebook or the red book or the blue book of verse. And so she was very much attached to keeping her work and writing daily. There's a story actually of once her mom said to her, "Gwendolyn, there's a fire down the road." And she said, "Okay," and kept writing because that's how committed she was to her work. By the age of 13, Ms. Brooks published her first poem. It was called Eventide, and it was published in a national publication. So it was her first poem in a national publication called American Childhood. When she wasn't writing, she was reading, and she read ferociously. Langston Hughes was one of her favorites, Paul Laurence Dunbar, James Weldon Johnson, and she also wrote letters to them asking for advice, sharing some of her work. Then she also began submitting poems where their poems were published because she was that committed to her work. She eventually got published in a lot of those publications. I mean, Gwendolyn Brooks was poeting like a boss. And despite many rejections along the way, she carried on with commitment and grace and became a legacy. She famously submitted to Poetry Magazine for 13 years. 13 years, lots of rejection slips. She just kept collecting rejections. And so it was 13 years before she finally got 2 poems published in 1944. One of these poems is called Gay Chaps at the Bar, and I'll read it for you right now. It has an epigraph. And guys I knew in the States, young officers return from the front crying and trembling. Gay chaps at the bar in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. Lieutenant William Couch in the South Pacific. We knew how to order, just the dash necessary, the length of gaiety and good taste, whether the raillery should be slightly iced and given green or served up hot and lush. We knew beautifully how to give to women the summer spread, the tropics of our love, when to persist or hold a hunger off, knew white speech, how to make a look an omen. But nothing ever taught us to be islands, and smart athletic language for this hour was not in the curriculum. No stout lesson showed how to chat with death. We brought no brass fortissimo among our talents to holler down the lions in this air. So her work, which often were snapshots of everyday life, as I mentioned earlier, and struggles and joys, is already radical and revolutionary just on its own, because she allowed her story to occupy spaces not made easily accessible to her. But also she worked as an activist on and off the page. Yes, so her poems were deeply personal, but also the political is personal. And she was willing to go to those places with her work. And that feels very important to us right now, to remember that we can go to the page with powerful things that need to be heard and need to change in our world. She joined various political movements and organizations and advocated for with groups who were trying to improve housing in Chicago and make improvements upon poverty. And so she did start writing about living specifically in a Chicago kitchenette. Now, these were single room family units developed during the Depression era, where landlords turned apartments into even smaller mini spaces. And her activism inspires us to remember that our work, our passion means nothing if it serves us alone. Our life is communal, so our reach can be communal as well. It may feel difficult, but especially in a world of so much pain and division as we find ourselves in 2021, it is quite necessary. She wrote 2 poems about Chicago's very own Emmett Till, who was murdered in Mississippi in 1955 by white men. One of those poems is a very long poem called "A Bronzeville Mother Loiters in Mississippi. Meanwhile, a Mississippi mother burns bacon." A very haunting poem about Emmett Till's murder. But a companion poem that she has following that poem is called "The Last Quatrain of the Ballad of Emmett Till." I'd like to share it with you now. The epigraph: "After the murder, after the burial. Emmett's mother is a pretty-faced thing. The tent of pulled taffy, she sits in a red room drinking black coffee. She kisses her killed boy, and she is sorry. Chaos and windy grays through a red prairie." As you can see, Gwendolyn Brooks holds space for silences, and sometimes even, and especially in this poem, I think it's what we aren't hearing, what we know happened before the poem, that may even create the tension and the grief through those small silences that she has in it. It's what isn't said in the poem. And she had a gift of being able to do that. Now, for her Nashville connection, many people actually divide Brooks's career into 2 halves, and I don't do that necessarily, but there is something I think that's worth highlighting. People often say that the shift happened in 1968, and Brooks herself even mentions the importance of a Black Writers Conference that she attended here in Nashville at Fisk University, and she speaks of how it impacted her so greatly. At this conference is when she finally was able to connect with other Black writers in a very meaningful way, and hear them telling Black stories and speaking directly to Black people with an authentic Black voice. And so much of her writing before had been palatable to elite white audiences. She was mastering styles that we'd heard from other white male voices. She was creating forms with her collections, and so a lot of times it was applauded by white people because there was something palatable about her ability to master what white people were already writing about, or how white people were already writing. At this conference, though, she was challenged to think about what it meant to be a part of the Black arts movement and ways that she might not only buy into creating work that appeals directly to white people, but to really liberate her voice, where she didn't think of the Black voice as being monolith, and she didn't think that her poetry had to look only one way. She recognizes that as Black people, we have many voices, and those many voices can have a space on the page. And so she confronted this and kind of had a reawakening that she doesn't have to concern herself with the white lens on her poetry, but simply write. And so Nashville was this very liberating place for her, right here at Fisk University. Now, the poet Terrence Hayes, whom I mentioned earlier, he created a poetry form called the Golden Shovel, which is a little bit in the epigraph to We Real Cool. The pool players were playing at a club called the Golden Shovel. And so Terrence Hayes created a form that he calls the Golden Shovel, in which he takes every word from Brooks's poem, We Real Cool, and uses it at the end of one of his poetry lines. And so if you were to see the poem on the page, you could actually read the whole We Real Cool poem down the side. It's incredible. He's really wonderful. So check out Terrence Hayes' Golden Shovel. But because he created this poetry style, it's actually become wildly popular to use with various poets' work. And there's actually an anthology of people who created golden shovels, all based on Gwendolyn Brooks's work. So again, I highly encourage you to check out the Golden Shovel anthology and celebrate Brooks's legacy. I also encourage you to try writing a golden shovel yourself. You can choose one of Gwendolyn Brooks's short poems, or you can even just choose a verse and just write all the words down the side of the page and just start writing to that word and see what appears, see what develops. It's fun to play with our own poetry and our work when we're being inspired by a legacy, and Gwendolyn Brooks truly was a legacy. She was a woman always committed to language, to voice, to reality, and truth. And what a special gift that we get to know her still through her work, even after her life on earth is done. So enjoy writing your golden shovel and just kind of play like you're a little baby Gwendolyn at 11 years old in love with language and having a good time. I will close our time today with what I think is one of her most powerful poems from her later years of poetry. You will hear in this poem how she's able to master language and also her attention to details of living realities that we face. You also hear how she plays with sound so well. I hope it speaks to you as we encounter and wrestle with so much grief and necessary healing in our country and our homes. As we change our lives to care for each other and protect our neighbors in the midst of this pandemic, which has not been easy, but we're willing to do it in order to protect each other. And I hope that you'll hold on to it, this poem, until we're able to go out and gather again. May we still, until that time, somehow have our blooming and live. The second sermon on the war plan. 1. This is the urgency. Live, and have your blooming in the noise of the whirlwind. 2. Salvage in the spin, endorse the splendor splashes, stylize the flawed utility, prop 'em a line or failing light, but know the whirlwind is our commonwealth. Not the easy man who rides above them all, not the jumbo brigand, not the pet bird of poets, that sweetest sonnet shall straddle the whirlwind. Nevertheless, live. 3. All about are the cold places. All about are the pushmen and jeopardy, theft. All about are the stormers and scramblers, but what must our season be, which starts from fear? Live and go out, define and medicate the whirlwind. 4. The time cracks into furious flower, lifts its face all unashamed, and sways in wicked grace, whose half-black hands assemble oranges, is tom-tom hearted. Goes in bearing oranges and boom, and there are bells for orphans, and red and shriek and sheen. A garbage man as dignified as any diplomat. Big Bessie's feet hurt like nobody's business, but she stands bigly under the unruly scrutiny, stands in the wild weed. In the wild weed she is a citizen, and is a moment of highest quality admirable. It is lonesome, yes, for we are the last of the loud, nevertheless live, conductor blooming in the noise and whip of the whirlwind. Gwendolyn Brooks, 1968. I hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit about Ms. Brooks, her poetic style, her voice, and her many accomplishments. Definitely check out the library. I know that they have this, which is one of my favorite collections of her selected poems. And so you can grab Mrs. Brooks's book and spend more time with some of the radical work that she presented and the everyday life of being Black in America during her life. Thank you, and have an incredible Black History Month.